So we are now recording again. So I'd like to welcome Ned from the Waterford Distillery. Really pleased to get Ned on because I do think he's one that we've all wanted to get on and have a chat with, because I think, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, that Waterford at the moment is possibly one of the most controversial distilleries that are out there and one of the most highly anticipated distilleries out there. So what I'd like to do first of all is hand over to Ned and let him just give us an introduction to himself and give us a brief chat about the Waterford Distillery. And then I kind of think it's going to be easier if we do it as a group and chat to him rather than me chuck all the questions, because it could get quite one way otherwise. So I'll hand over to you, Ned. If you can give us a brief introduction, or as long as you want, you know, there's no time limits on this. Chat about Waterford, what you're doing, and whatever you want to tell us.
No, well, thanks very much, Søren, and I have to follow Ian, so no pressure there. So yeah, I'm head distiller at Waterford Distillery, and I'm in work today, so I'm in the taste room. So I got a good bit of work done this morning. No one to bother me, so it was good going this morning. I'm sure some people know about Waterford or have heard about Waterford, but I suppose what we're doing is we're looking at grain, basically. So we're looking at farmers. So what we have is individual farmers. We work with Minch Malt, who are maltsters, and they have contracts with the farmers. And we have roughly around 40 different farms every year with individual batches. And they keep that separate throughout the process, from the field, obviously, through to drying, through to malting and distilling and into cask. And that gives us then an option then to bottle single farm releases or to have cuvées or mixtures of farms. And I suppose what we're looking at is that barley is, as is on the website, barley is king, so that the flavour is coming from barley. And yeah, it's controversial, as Søren has said. We're not trying to ram this down anyone's throat. This is what we're doing, and we're just looking at different new makes. Obviously, the casks then as well, people will talk with the cask influence, but for us, we can definitely see differences that new make spirit from farm to farm. So of the 40 farms that we use a year, we have about 31 conventional farms. We have 6 organic and 3 biodynamic farmers. We buy 2,500 tons of malt a year. So each farm should supply us in around 75 tons of malt. Organic farmers, we have the last couple of years, 2 individual organic farmers who can supply us 75 tons each. And then the other farmers mixed will supply us 75 tons. The heritage will only supply us, I think the heritage is coming in, or came in last week, and we got about 46 or 50 tons off that. And the biodynamic is a mixture of 3 farms, and they supply about 45 tons malted barley. So I think we're the only commercial, we have the only commercial farmers who are growing biodynamic first. But I suppose the organic and the biodynamic and the heritage grains are different. But I suppose the conventional farmers is where we're seeing the difference in terroir. And I suppose, you know, what is terroir? Terroir is a French term that is used in wine a lot. And basically what it is what influences how a plant will grow. So if anyone is a gardener out there, and even if you look at a hydrangea, and a hydrangea can be pink or blue. And why is it pink or blue? It's down to the soil pH. And I suppose that's just a simple example of how the soil will affect that flower. And I suppose for us then, we're seeing what affects the barley that's coming through. So it's weather, it's topography, it's altitude, It's where the farmer is growing his crop. Some of the farms are on the coast, west or southeast coast of Ireland. Other farms then are surrounded by forests. And I'm sure wherever you're based in the world there, Irish farms are never really flat. You'll have fields that are have dips and stuff. And even in one field, you'll have different terroirs, different soils. So we're doing a lot of work on that, and we're also doing a terroir project because Mark Rainier, obviously, as people know, is the CEO. He's the driving force behind Waterford, and he firmly believes in terroir, and has had lots of discussions and debates with people, but felt that doing the Waterford project and doing it on such a scale that we probably needed some scientific backing behind it. So we're 3 years into a terroir project with Chagas, who are the part of the Department of Agriculture. Tacklock and Thompson are involved in Scotland, and a guy called Dr. Dustin Herb from Oregon State University. So he's going to do a peer review paper on terroir, and I suppose the initial findings are very good. Because Mark, I suppose, wants a piece of paper to say, listen, this has been proven scientifically, and Dustin has done it for beer in Oregon before. I suppose that's why he came on Mark's radar and he got involved. But like he's presenting a peer review paper, so it's not as if, as much as we'd like to say this, Dustin, or find this, it's findings. So it's scientific, and there's also 3 independent tasting panels as well involved.
Yeah.
So we're 3 years into it. We should have presented in Edinburgh in May, but obviously with the whole COVID, we didn't get to do that. So I think it's going to be around the end of the year before we'll be able to present to groups. Yeah. So roughly that's kind of what's happening. As people know, we had our first bottling there recently. So we have 2 bottles sent out, 2 different single farms called Ballykilcavan and Bannow Island. So they're winding their way to different places now. There's Taiwan and China, obviously Europe, and that should be hitting the shelves in the next week or so.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we managed about 4 minutes before we got the terroir. We've got one of our members has to do a shot every time we mention terroir, so she's not going to last very long. But on a serious note, I kind of want to leave the terroir to a little bit later, because I do appreciate that is probably the biggest thing, that you are pushing at the moment. But what intrigues me is obviously is Waterford and how it fits into the Irish whiskey scene, because as we all know, that there's obviously a debate as to whether it was Ireland or Scotland that came first, who's the best, Ireland or Scotland. There's all this, and it doesn't really matter at the end because it's all about the whiskey. And that's kind of how I look at Waterford. It doesn't matter whether we believe in what you're doing or whether we don't believe in what you're doing. It's all about the finished product. But I appreciate, I think Waterford are in an old Diageo plant, which was a brewery. Can you tell us a little bit more about that before we go?
Yeah, so just a bit of the history of the site, I suppose. So there's been a brewery here since 1792, and we're on the banks of the River Suir. So as most of you will know, a brewery or distillery is built for 2 water sources, because transportation in and out, and also good water supply. So I suppose that's the reason that it was built here originally. And it was a strongman brewery. So they did beers and that for a long time. And then Guinness purchased it here in 1956. So they would have been making lagers and ales here. And then in 2003, they decided to spend 40 million euros to update the plant. So basically, they spent 40 million euros, converted from a traditional brewery to what was called a BBA, or beer blending agent site. So we made Guinness concentrate for Africa. So there was a plant in St. James's Gate that was making it for Nigeria and the other African markets. But actually, Nigeria is the second biggest, well, at the time was the second biggest market for Guinness in the world. So that market was growing, so they couldn't keep up with the demand for the rest of the world. So they decided to put in a plant here, and they put in kind of new technology then here. They put in a mash filter, and they put in a hydro mill. And the hydro mill and the mash filter worked great in trials, but didn't work great in reality. When we were doing the what we call the black grain, so that we had a roasting drum, so we would take in barley and roast the barley. So it didn't work very well. So I remember the first day we did our first brew, and Ian was mentioned about getting one mash through there earlier on in the week. We had every dignitary from Guinness down who had spent 40 million expecting to see this work very well, and it took us 4 days to get it through the mash filter. So there was champagne in the fridge, supposed to be popped, and never got popped. I think we had to dump it, we had to dig it out. So the mash filter and the hydro mill took us probably 2 years to get right on the black grain. But we also did some malted barley as a certain percentage of the Guinness concentrate going out, and that flew through. So when we were doing that, we were probably getting extracts of about 103 or 104% on that. So it worked perfectly for the malted barley. It was just had a problem with the roasted grains. So that went fine. We sent off IBCs, and Guinness also developed what was called a bag and box for it as well. So they put a plastic bag in a container and filled it into it and sent it off. The thing with that was they didn't have to maintain a tanker fleet, and the container could come back with a load. So that was a savings as well. And the good thing about, from the point of view from Guinness, I suppose, was we were sending off an extract, so there was no alcohol in it, so we didn't have to pay duty. So the reason we didn't have alcohol is we had an evaporator and a stripper. So 100% of the brew, we'll say, was condensed down to about 20% volume. So the spirit that came off that actually was put into tanks, the tanks that we use here as well, and that was about 70% alcohol. So we used to water that down to about 23% then, and send that back up to Dublin, and that'd be sent into Guinness and bits and pieces as well. But we also sent off some full strength tanks at 70%, and I believe some of those are used and are in casks somewhere. So that's an interesting fact, I suppose. I know we sent off some to Carbery in West Cork. I think Guinness themselves may have put a couple in casks, I'm not sure, as trials, but someone might come out of the woodwork and say something about that maybe at a future stage. But then in 2013, they decided, with the downward trend in beer markets, to close ourselves, ourselves, Kilkenny Brewery and Dundalk, and consolidate it all to St. James's Gate. So that's what they did. 10 years after spending 40 million, they closed the site in December 2013. So ourselves and Dundalk are two distilleries now. Obviously, John Teeling in Dundalk, Great Northern. So then Mark was on the lookout for somewhere to start up after Brookladdy, and he remembered a conversation he had with Duncan McIlvery, where Duncan said that the best barley he ever saw came from the southeast of Ireland. So it was literally an aligning of stars between Mark looking for the southeast of Ireland and the brewery being for sale. So John Teeling had been down looking at the brewery here, and Mark was looking at around the same time. So I think there was a couple of bids went in, and Mark kind of wanted it, so upped the bid a lot, and Guinness were happy to take it. They probably got more than they expected, and Mark got the brewery here for a song. Like when Guinness left, they took the rose plant with them, they took the IBC filler with them, and they wiped all the software and they left everything else.
Yeah. So obviously you've moved into a building that's kind of halfway ready for making whiskey, in a sense. That's obviously, so you've obviously made quite a few changes. I've seen quite a few of the videos with a lot of shiny steel and things like that. I mean, how big a process was it to actually change it to make whiskey?
Not huge, because all that stuff was here.
Yeah.
So really, all we needed was the stills. Obviously, there was some pipe modifications and stuff that had to be done, but as you all know, 2/3 of making whiskey is brewing.
Yeah.
The mash house was there. Everything was left, so we just got that back up and running. We make roughly around 1 million LAs a year, and I'm just looking at the tanks here. I think we use 4 washbacks that can hold 100,000 liters at full capacity. Obviously, we filled that to about 85,000 liters, but we have another 12 tanks outside that are not in use at all.
Mm.
So we have a lot of capacity to increase if we wanted to. So the stills were the only thing we needed to get up and running. So Mark, obviously coming from Brookladdy, which was 1890 whatever, to a brewery that was newly renovated in 2003. So it's not an aesthetically pleasing distillery like a lot of the other ones, but what he called it was a facilitator.
Mm.
So it helped us, it facilitated us with the whole track and trace piece that we needed for the project as well. So from that point of view, it helped us a lot. So the stills were the major part, and obviously he had 2 stills that he bought from Brookladdy, so they got up and running. So 2 Inverleven stills built in 1972 that had worked on now for about 19 years. So they went to Forsyth, were a bit of work done on them. So a year and about a day after Mark bought the brewery, we had our first trial run in the distillery. So it was the 9th of December we had a run, and the 10th of December we had our spirit still run.
Yeah.
So that helped us really getting us going,
Yeah, I mean, I know with Mark, obviously, like you say, he started at Brookladdy. We've all kind of heard the stories of him standing at the gates looking in and wanting to buy and being told to go away and things like this. And I think, I mean this in the nicest possible way, but obviously controversy has kind of followed Mark where he's gone. And it's nice to see him sticking to what he believes and put, I know it's not all his money, but, kind of putting his money where his mouth is, and, going down this line of being very focused of where he wants to go.
Yeah, and that's it, I suppose. Yeah, he's controversial, but he's not controversial for controversy's sake.
No, yeah, that's what I meant, when I say in the nicest way, yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose what he's doing and what he's always done is he's probably had beliefs, and they might be contrary to what's in the industry at the moment.
Mm.
But he is firm in his beliefs. And one of the things that he said when he came to Waterford was, it took him a long time at Brookladdy to get up and running, and he never really got to where he wanted to go. When he came to Waterford, there was no stumbling blocks. Everyone was behind him for various reasons. I suppose one of the reasons from my point of view is I had to clear who he was. So when you meet him for the first few times, you're struck by his passion, you're struck by his drive. So yeah, you just wanted to get involved, and that's kind of what happened in Waterford. So that's why everything worked, I think, so well starting off in Waterford. Like in year 1, this is my first whiskey job, so I had no idea about what the norm and stuff. So in year 1, they were talking about they wanted to be a 1 million LA distillery.
Mm.
No, they meant 1 million LAs 3 or 4 years down the line. And we were disappointed in year 1 where we got 970,000 LAs.
Yeah.
But like when Mark and John Adams was the CFO, came back and said, to have that stock laid down in year one is unbelievable. We have an engineer here, Anthony, who worked in the brewery for 35 years and who knew every pump and valve to change out that was given bother. And in the first year, we had 4 hours of downtime.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. That, just to have such a smooth start was brilliant. But yeah, so Mark is controversial, I suppose, because, he holds different beliefs to people. But he's firm in what he believes in. And the other thing is, like, we're not trying to ram things down people's. Well, I'm not trying to ram things down people's throat. Like, I can tell you what I'm doing, what we're doing here in Waterford. And as you said, Soren, the proof of the pudding will be in the tasting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of interesting things is the fact of you've gone into Ireland, and to me, when I think of Irish whiskey, I think of the triple distillation or the pot still. You've kind of gone very similar to a Scottish style of whiskey in an Irish way. I mean, was it ever considered to go the triple distilled, or was it always going to be double distilled?
Well, I can't speak for Mark, but I think it was probably always double distilled, primarily because we had 2 stills.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously there is a way of triple distilling with 2 stills, but
I suppose at the time Macallan had their new distillery being built. 4 sites had a 3 years waiting list, so the 2 stills helped us get up and running. But I think the style of spirit that Mark was looking for, it suits a double distillation.
Yeah.
It's, not going to the third still, going to those higher ABVs. So I think the style of spirit that Mark was looking for, it was always going to be a double distillation.
Yeah.
We're looking for a more light, elegant spirit. Like Ian was mentioning there, that he cuts around 63 on the normal. Like at the moment, well, I suppose when we started, we were obviously we were trying lots of bits and pieces to get the balance running. But when we got the balance running, our cut is around 66. So our spirits, a cut point, our hearts are very, very tight, and that just suits us. It suits the style of spirit that we're looking to produce, So, so the style of spirit double distillation is what we went for.
So, with the understanding, I mean, obviously, the terroir is going to come into this at some point. I want to kind of stick to the process and the farm issues of it. So, you use roughly 1 farm per week?
Yeah, in around that. So, for us to process a farm, so it takes us about 8.5 days to distill a farm. And we would brew probably every 2nd day. So we do, around 110 tons of barley gets malted to about 75 tons of malted barley. So that comes in, and we do 8 brews of about 9.2, depending on what the size of the farm coming in. And we do 8 brews, and we put the 8 brews into 4 washbacks. So we would probably, every 2nd day, we do two brews.
Yeah.
And it takes us then about 8.5 days to distill that. So what we do is we're looking for a long fermentation. So we keep it in fermentation for about 120 hours. So as I said earlier, we have about 85,000 litres in the washback, and we're not IDL, so we can't put it all into one still. So we break that into 5 charges. At the start, when we started, we used to do 4 charges, so bigger volumes. But we found that the 5 charges work better. So it's not filling up the stills as much. It's giving us a bit more headspace, a bit more copper. So that's what we do at the moment.
And so once you've gone through that farm, that's it for that farm for the rest of the year then? Yeah,
that's it. It's from, I suppose we could do a farm twice in a year, but it's from different grain years. It's from different vintages. So that's it.
And how do you, so you've obviously done a batch from one farm, how do you do a clean down between batches then?
So we do. Diageo kindly left us a state-of-the-art cleaning or a sip center. So we have cold caustic, hot caustic, acid, recovered water, fresh water. So after each farm we clean through, and as the washback is empty, we give it a clean as well. So we do a clean after every farm.
Yeah. And so what happens with the heads and the feints from each distillery?
Yes, so there is a crossover on the conventional between the low wines and feints. There's a percentage of crossovers. I can't take it off the top of my head now. It's only a couple of percent, even not even, I think. And like the thing about it is, we've always said there's a crossover on the heads and the tails. Between it, we do change out when we're doing organic and biodynamic and heritage, and we pull that back for the following year. But like if we're doing 31 conventional farms a year, and we keep back the low wines and feints from that, you're talking of about I don't know, about 4 IBCs. We may never do that farm again, so it doesn't make sense. So there is a small crossover, and I suppose the Tower project, when that was done purely. There was no crossover in heads and tails. It's just purely done on the spirit. So, but yeah, there is a small crossover on each farm as we go. So from the last still run and the next wash run will be a crossover. So
in theory then, and this is getting really predictive, and I appreciate that, but so there's always going to be a little bit, obviously, on a decreasing scale. But that first run then from your new batch to between your old batch, is that marked up separately so you know there is a little bit more of the old farm in that one?
Say that again, Sarn, you're kind of breaking up there.
Sorry. So obviously between the batches then, so you've put your heads and your bits into the new batch. Like you say, it's a very small amount, so in theory, almost negligible. But Richard, can you just mute yourself, Richard, please?
Yeah, there's someone making noise.
Yeah. So obviously, between the batches, that first run of the new field, of the new farms, is got that small amount from the previous farm. So will you mark them casks up as possibly having a little bit of the previous farm, or is that just kind of forgotten about?
Well, I suppose what we have is we have traceability and to know which farm. Say we're doing your farm today, and we're finishing your farm. We're starting my farm tomorrow, and then we're starting Ian's next. We have full traceability on that, but the casks are not marked to say that there's a little bit of a crossover in it. It's down as whichever the majority of the farm it is, the 99% is, we call it that farm. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, I appreciate you said earlier that it's done slightly different with your organic and your, because obviously the organic has to be kept separate. But going back to the farm by farm then, so I'm assuming when you're getting that farm in, is everything brought in direct from the field, or is some of it stored on farm?
No. So what happens is, as I said, we have a contract with Minch Malt.
Yeah.
So normally what happens is the farmer brings the grain into the merchant, and Minch Malt have a contract with Dalton's in Kilkenny where the cathedral is. So they actually go out and collect it. So the farmer doesn't bring it in to ensure traceability. So Dalton's will go out, collect it at the farm, and bring it into Dalton's where it's dried on its individual batch. So they would much rather dry the thousands and thousands of tons that they do rather than drying the 120 tons or thereabouts of the barley that comes in. So what happens then is it's put in the yard, so it's marked as Sarn's farm, and it's dried, and then it's put into the cathedral individually, and then when that's done, they start the next batch, and it's all put into the cathedral in its own bays.
Yeah, and so once you've made each batch, I'm pretty much sure you then split each batch down into a certain amount of casks, and it's all the same for every farm.
Yeah, so when we started initially, it was 50% of the farm went into American first fill, 20% went into American virgin casks, 15 went into French casks, and 15 went into what we call VDN. It's not a technical VDN, but that's what we call it. So sweet fortified casks, Port, Madeira, Masala, Saltern, Risa, and those type of casks. So as we went through that, then we were seeing that some of the VDN casks weren't giving us the colours we were looking for, because we're going to be natural whiskey. We're not using caramel. We're depending on the casks for the colours. So we decided then we would get some French virgin casks, maybe get some rum casks as well. So there's a bit of a breakdown then. So we use those now as well. So when we were talking about the VDN casks, we're not talking about seasoned casks.
Yeah.
But, you know, the older casks. So they're giving us lots of sweetness, I suppose, from the casks, but not the colour on some of them.
Yep.
Yeah, we're using some French virgin from Radu and some rum casks as well.
Yeah, and I know from seeing a couple of videos that I think yourself have done and a few others from within the company, that you are experimenting on different types of casks as well.
Yes, yeah. So in Ireland, I suppose different to Scotland in that the technical file doesn't state oak. It says it has to be in a wooden vessel less than 700 litres, above 40% for 3 years to be whiskey. So I think it says such as oak, but doesn't say oak. So we're using, we have some Andean oak, some chestnut, some cherry, some acacia, and some mulberry casks as well that we're using. But we're not putting on, you know, we have a few of those. They're not a core part of the breakdown of each farm. So we're using some of those, and some of those are very interesting. I went to Whiskey Base in Holland with some wild cherry casks, and probably 70% of the audience hated it, and 30% of the audience wanted to buy it there and then. So it's a bit of a Marmite one, I think. And also, I can see why oak is used, because I think it's the chestnut. Sorry, no, we're using chestnut as well, actually. I think it's the cherry and the mulberry they just leak. I think in year one we probably lost 30% liquid.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see why oak is used, because they're obviously a tighter vessel for holding the liquid.
Yeah, I mean, just so everybody knows, you know, there are some questions already coming in about the terroir, but I'm going to leave that because I'm going to try and split it into another section. So want to kind of stay away from terroir at the moment. But that was
sorry, and this might be a terroir question, but just interested in New Make Spirit, Ned, and if you had made any of that available, because that's where I think you would really taste the difference in barley, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so like that is where, like, I'm fortunate enough I get to taste it every day.
Lots of it behind you, yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of there. Like, so what we've done is we've sent off some terroir packs to journalists and some media and bits and pieces. It's not for commercial release or anything at the moment. There's been lots of requests for it. But Mark Newton, I'm going to this one over to Mark Newton. Mark Newton has sent. We've sent off, I don't know how many packs, terroir packs. Some people probably have seen them with two probably prototype whiskey. So they've gone to lots of people.
Just 1 minute, Andy, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly who's after getting them all. I know some people maybe on here might have tasted it, but yes, ideally it would be the thing to do to send the spirit off. But then you're nearly a separate industry sending spirit out to people.
Yeah.
If you got any more to send out, I'd happily receive some.
And to be honest with you, I'd rather put it into a cask and wait for the whiskey to come out.
Yeah, no, I mean, one sort of going back to what we was talking about with the different styles of casks. you know, how big a difference have you noticed between the different styles of wood, you know, your oak, your acacia and things like that?
Yeah, there's a huge difference, I suppose. It's kind of going back to the conversation where people have said, or it's probably in the industry, people have said that, you know, 70 or 80% of flavour of whiskey comes from your oak. And what we say in Waterford is that 100% of your spirit is influenced by 100% of your timber or oak or whatever. So what that means is, you know, our wood policy is probably 30% of our overall budget, which is if you saw budget is fairly severe. So what we're doing is that we're looking at buying quality oak, quality casks, and that's one thing Mark learned in Brookladdy, that, you know, when they didn't have money and they bought a bit more aged oak, that they had to do remedial work to try and help it out when they wanted to release it. So that's the one thing that he said here, and we're in the fortunate position where he said, you know, obviously Mark has a lot of money, and we have very rich investors who are in it for the all, and they have no problem spending a lot of money on timber. So the acacia, the mulberry, the chestnut, the wild cherry, they have a big influence on the spirit then. But the thing you can still see, even with the American first fills and the American virgin casks, you can still see the DNA of the spirit coming through.
Yeah.
So you can see the light, elegant spirit coming through, and you can see the difference in the farms coming through. That's still, for me, visible. And hopefully that when you get the bottles of whiskey, you'll still see that coming through. Like Ian was mentioning earlier on about cut points and stuff. You can influence, obviously, your spirit with that as well. But it's just you can see the DNA of the Waterford style coming through in the different casks. The casks then have a huge influence of, obviously, that, because if you're using casks that are, you know, recharred, or you know, a fourth or fifth or sixth fill, you know, they're not going to impart a huge amount onto the spirit. So the casks do have an influence, but what you put in day one is what we believe will make good whiskey.
Yeah. So, I mean, going on the fact of, you've already mentioned that you've got, was it 120 hours fermentation?
120 hours. Well, 120 hours for the first charge to come out. So
right.
By the time the fifth,
and then obviously it grows. Yeah, it goes. So what is the range? 120 to
about 160.
About 160. So, are your stills quite tall as well?
So the stills are not. They're relatively tall. Yeah, they have an onion shape, and they're not really tall, but they're not a short neck. But the other thing is, with the volumes that we put into the stills, so we're not charging them up to, normally you charge them up to just under the door. So we are below that again. So when Forsyths were here, they were recommending up to the door. I think on the spirit still is about 13,000 litres, and we're only charging that up to about 11,000 litres. Yep. You know, so we have an extra little bit as well. And the way we run the stills are very, very slow. So when the commissioning was done and the basis of design was done here, they were looking at a 7.5 hour turnaround time for our spirit still. And we're about 10 hours on that. So, you know, we have a very low steam and low running on the spirit. So when we're on spirit, we don't go over 500 litres an hour. When we're on tails, then we go up to about 1,400.
Yeah.
And when Forsyths were here, they were recommending that we did about 1,400 on spirit. And so we're not making for quantity, we're making for quality. Like if someone came in the morning and bought here that 1 million LAs with just everything we're doing at the moment, you'd probably another 50 or 60% onto that. Yeah.
So, I mean, looking at and listening to what you're saying then, so obviously you've got a slow fermentation, you've got sort of probably an average height. So you are really looking for that fruity, florally type spirit. I mean,
so
is that how you would describe your spirit then?
Yeah, so we're looking for kind of secondary fermentation. So I would probably, in a couple of words, describe the spirit as being elegant, fruity, and floral.
Yeah.
That's kind of the style of spirit that we're looking for, and the way we're doing it, you know, helps that as well.
Yeah. I mean, has anybody got any questions? Not about Terroir.
Yes, just one, if that's okay. Hi Ned, I'll be over in September, by the way, for the pilgrimage, so looking forward to meeting you.
Good.
Going back to the single farms, given, you know, you get about 20 batches from a single farm run, and given that the first charge, you know, has got that blended, you know, feints and foreshots in there, do you notice a difference batch to batch along that, you know, that 20 runs, that 20 batches, and do you normalise that difference by vatting, or do you?
So we would notice a difference, but it's probably from the time. So when the first charge goes up, it's probably 10 hours from the second charge to go up. So the fermentation has a bit of an impact on that. What we do is, what we've done from the very start is we've kept samples of every run, every still run that we've done. So we have all those samples. And what we do is the tanks, our spirit tanks here that we hold the spirit, we put half the farm into that. So the first two washbacks, the first 10 runs go into that, and they stay there. We send it out to Ballygarn then, where we do the casking, and we do it out there. So the first 10 runs are mixed together. So there's mixture in it. So we're not doing it. We're not bottling, or we're not casking by one washback, or just by one run at a time. So there's mixing going on, but we'll see differences, slight differences in each run as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hopefully September will go ahead, folks, as well.
I hope so. Ed, good to see you, mate. You guys, I believe, you're just using distiller's yeast, are you?
Yeah. So
and I understand that, you know, you want to do that for consistency and so that you've not got too many variables, and to let the sort of barley character come through. Is that sort of part of just this phase of the terroir project, and sort of maybe after the project is kind of finished and you've had the results, do you imagine you may experiment with sort of different yeasts?
Yeah, good question, Ed. Yeah, so we use distiller's yeast, and I suppose, it's just trying to keep that process of the yeast as repeatable as possible, so that the difference in the new make is, you know, we can say it's barley, and everything else is kind of fairly repeatable. But one of the things that Diageo left here was a yeast propagation plant. So we have a facility to do that. And Mark has been talking, as mentioned, to himself and Neil Conway, who's the head brewer, whose job it would probably be to do some of that, to start looking at yeast. And this is probably 12, maybe even 18 months ago, but we kind of said to him, listen, can we just get up and walk before we start running, please? Yeah. And we do that. So we have looked at different yeasts. You know, obviously you could use wine yeast. You could use different yeast for flavors. And one of the things we'd probably look at is see, could we cultivate or get a wild Irish yeast that we could do something with. So down the line we look at yeast, but not for a little while yet, Ed.
Yeah, nice.
What yeast do they use in Poitín?
Sorry?
What yeast do they use in Poitín?
In Poitín? Jeez, I don't know.
Yogurt.
I don't know. I don't know what they use in Poitín. I presume they'll find something if they're adept at making Poitín. They'll have their hands on different types of yeast if they wanted.
So, any more questions? Not on terroir?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go on then.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what's your own personal opinion and Waterford's opinion on the technical file of Ireland? Are you advocates for it being more streamlined, or would you prefer to see more freedom within the whiskey you can make?
Well, probably won't speak for Waterford, but I could do. But it's basically a bit shit, you know. It's yeah. Like, listen, the Irish technical file was written probably in a bit of a vacuum of some of the other distilleries being up and running. It's there at the moment. Like, there's lots of conversations now about why you can only use 5% other grains, you know, and things like that. So it's I suppose no surprise that Mark is not a huge fan of the whole bureaucracy and stuff at the moment. Like, we've had huge problems just with labels and bottles and bits and pieces trying to get stuff on it. But the technical file, it probably keeps it nearly too narrow in terms of, you know, single malt is fairly straightforward. But one of the things I was a bit surprised about when I first came into the industry, into whiskey, was that we don't have to use Irish grain. Now, you know, in fairness, if you don't use probably foreign grain, you're not going to have a huge Irish whiskey industry. But surely there should be something to say, something there on the technical file that said, you know, this grain is just Irish, you know, and that on it. So I think a lot of people who are getting into whiskies would assume that the product would be of Ireland in terms of, you know, where it's grown and stuff. And Mark has kind of spoken a bit about that, and is probably, you know, kicking over a few doors trying to get things changed. It's not going to change in a hurry, but I think it's a pity for some of the other distilleries out there who want to do whiskey and go back to, you know, the old recipes, and it's not going to be categorized as a pot still because they've used 10% some wheat instead of the 5%. Like, so the technical file was written in, you know, in my opinion, probably in a vacuum of what was coming. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see a bit more work put into it, a bit more voice lended to some of the smaller distilleries and some people who have good things to say. And listen, at the end of the day, the more protection we give Irish whiskey, the better.
Mm.
Okay, so you would be an advocate for putting into the technical file, to be Irish whiskey, you must be utilizing grain from Ireland in some manner.
Well, I wouldn't say to be Irish whiskey you have to use Irish grain, but there probably should be a category there to say this is 100% Irish or something like that, or, you know. So I wouldn't be, you know, I'm not going to say I think the whole technical file should be rewritten, but there should probably be something about Irish grain. If you're using X amount of Irish grain, or, you know, no Irish grain, like if you're not using any Irish grain at all, there should be a different category.
Okay, but like, does it prevent you from writing 100% Irish grain on the label today?
Sorry?
Does the technical file prevent you from writing 100% Irish grain on the label today?
Well, this is where it gets complicated now. The technical file doesn't stop you, but the HSA does. So does when you go to get your labels approved, you have to go to different bodies then to get them approved. So when you put stuff on the label, they'll say no or say yes. So on some of the things that we want to put on it, they said no because it infers that the rest of the industry is not doing that.
So could you not put on, just say, you know, not quite that, but 100% Irish product?
Every kind of language, every kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's Mark Newton and Mark Rainier had a bit of it took us a long time to get the labels approved. Probably, I can say this, not to 100% our satisfaction, but that's the only things we could get on it, like, you know. One of the things we couldn't put on it was a natural product.
Yeah. I mean, one of the craziest things that seem to be coming out of a lot of these chats that we're having with people, you know, yourself from Ireland, Louise from JJ Corrie, and David from France, you know, that the industry kind of is suffocating itself because it will not allow you to put what you want on labels and things like that. And it just seems, you know, it just seems that it's going mad.
Yeah, and I suppose it like, to a certain extent, I suppose people, you know, the powers in Ireland were probably taken by surprise by the growth of Irish whiskey and everything that was happening, like, you know. So I think they were definitely taken by surprise. There was probably things put in place then that, you know, are not easily moved. And yeah, I think a review at some stage would be good. But like to get a review where, you know, something could be done is probably not the easiest thing to do. It's like any government bodies, they're not going to say that, you know, what was in place might have been great at the start. So, you know, there's probably a lot of politics involved, a lot of bureaucracy, which is the same probably in every walk of life like that. I
mean, how old are the actual rules for Irish whiskey? Have they been altered recently?
Yeah, I think the technical file is new enough. I think there was a change done. I'm not sure the year, but like, yeah, it's. I think everything was kind of tidied up there a few years ago. I haven't read up my history on it. You'd probably have to get, if you wanted to get the technical file stuff. Peter Mulrine in Blackwater is the man to talk to and all that.
Yeah. Anybody got any more questions before we change subject?
I've got another question. Ned, one of the things that I'm most intrigued about what you guys are doing is your kind of introduction of European oak into your kind of cask mix. I know, I think, is it Radu that you get yours from? My kind of understanding is that sort of European oak gives you sort of more of a like kind of a creme brulee flavour rather than your kind of traditional vanilla that you get from American oak. Is that sort of something you're really looking to kind of introduce into the sort of style of spirit that you want to produce?
Yeah, so I suppose the Radu supplies the French virgin casks, but the French casks that we use are from different chateaus. So with Mark's contacts in France, he has a guy that he's used in Brookland. He's used him for years and years, and even when he was in the wine industry. So he knows the casks that we're looking for. So we get relatively young casks that would have had 2 wines in them. So about 36 months old, from good chateaus. So Mouton and Lafitte and casks like that. So yeah, we're looking for the influence from that, from colours and from flavours, because with the American casks, you know, I suppose most of the casks that are used are American first fill. So I suppose we're just looking for something different. And if you can look at each cask as being an ingredient, then you're just giving yourselves more options. So we fill roughly around 200 casks per farm. So while we talk about single farms, Mark's plan has always been to do a cuvée, or 20, 30, 40 farms. So if you look at each cask then as being an ingredient, we're giving ourselves a lot of options to make what we're looking for is to make the most profound whiskey in the world. We've never said that we're going to make the best whiskey in the world, but we think we'd like to make the most profound whiskey in the world, in that each farm, each cask will give us different nuances and layers.
But I mean, isn't that kind of what every distillery does? That, you know, that they find casks and they mix them together to produce a whiskey that is multi-layered.
Yeah, but it's keeping the terroir separate at the start. That's what's given us the options. And also, in terms of putting casks together, I'm not sure how many distilleries are only using 50% American first fill, and the rest of their spirit goes into American New, French, and VDN. So in terms of that, like, we're not talking about just a few casks. And the other thing is, it's maturing in it. It's not finishing in it. So, you know, it's going to be in American first fill, American new and Virgin, American, French and VDN for 5, 10, 15 years. So it's maturing in it. It's not being finished in it.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, obviously other distilleries are doing very similar, where you get, say, a double or a triple or triple wood, where you've got bourbon, you've got sherry, and you've got wine, or you know, I mean, I think, is it Teeling? One of theirs is done in 5 different types of wine casks. So, you know, at the end of the day, they're kind of doing the same. It's just you kind of put it a bit more posher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I suppose their starting point is still the same spirit.
Yeah.
You know, so for us, it's the different farms, it's the different spirit is the starting point. So, like, there's one of the girls here, Megan, her fiance is an actuary, and we sent him off to combinations, and he couldn't figure out how many combinations we could put together.
Yeah.
So maybe, you know, the likes of Teeling's doing the 5 casks. Yeah, I suppose, is it 5 casks? Is it the same spirit going into 5 casks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Or are they bringing 5 casks together? I don't really know. But I suppose if we come back and use that example back to ours, and 5 wine casks, like in one farm, we could have 7 wine casks.
Yeah.
We could have casks from Jim Beam, from Jack Daniels, you know. Obviously the new casks then we get from Kelvin and Speyside. The French cask, the Virgin cask we're using some Limousin oak as well. We're using 225 and 4. So, you know, it's just the different combinations. And if you use that as layers and layers and layers, whereas Teeling's maybe using 5, we could use 500.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to end